As the decade of the 1940s drew to a close, there were a number of pressing issues noted in the press. Frida Waldon noted that it was becoming difficult to fill vacant positions at the library because of the low salaries paid by the city. And for the first time, the concept of the acquisition of a mobile library, or bookmobile, was brought up. In 1951, the library had to settle for a renovation of the main library instead of a new building, and the first major renovation to be finished was public washrooms. Miss Waldon was also keen to open a library branch in the Westdale area, but this was adamantly opposed by Mayor Lloyd D. Jackson, who stated that the library didn't need any more branches, except in schools. It was also noted that school visits to libraries were to be praised for combating the evils of television and comic books. After a chaotic year of construction at the main library, they held an official reception on November 17, 1952, to celebrate the end of the renovations. In recognition of her work with the formation of the Canadian Library Association and the National Library of Canada, Frida Waldon was awarded an honorary doctorate from McMaster University on May 16, 1954. From then on, she insisted upon being referred to as Dr. Waldon. A friend of hers from the 1940s and early 50s who acted with her in the theatrical community was asked one time what the most impressive thing about Frida Waldon was in his opinion. He didn't hesitate. He said, "The most impressive thing about Frida Waldon was that she could drink any man under the table. She drank scotch. Neat." On a sad note for those who remember the first Hamilton Public Library building fondly, July of 1955 saw the demolition of the building. The site is now occupied by a parking garage. Innovations in service came in the 1950s as well. The first service to shut-ins in cooperation with the Junior League of Hamilton began from Barton Library in 1955. Bookmobile service began out of the site of the proposed branch library in Westdale, with 5 stops. On June 6, 1957, came the official opening of the Western Library in Westdale. Designed by city architect Stanley Roscoe, it had dramatic outdoor lighting and was the first library in Canada to be air-conditioned. Although officially against censorship, the library had sneaky ways around books not deemed appropriate for all readers. 1959, after originally deciding not to buy Lolita, a public outcry forced them to change their mind. However, they only bought 2 copies and just let them sit. A librarian later explained, if they had catalogued them while the demand was so high, the reserve list would have been enormous and they would have had to buy more copies. By the time we got around to catalog it, most of the people who wanted it just because of the publicity had gone on to something else, and then it was read by the people who were seriously interested in Nabokov, rather than those who were only reading it because of the titillation. The decade of the 1950s ended with a familiar refrain as Dr. Waldon continued to press the urgent need for a new main library. The decade of the 1960s started out with starting salaries for librarians raised to $4,200. Showing an advanced technology for libraries at the time, they produced a movie called Wide Open Doors. It is 20 minutes long, in full color, and all about the Hamilton Public Library. And now began the long, torturous journey towards a new main library, as the Library Board officially announced that they were seeking to construct an addition to the Carnegie Library building. Frida Waldon had been advocating a new library, or at the very least an addition to the existing main library, since she took over as chief librarian in 1940. Throughout her 23 years as chief librarian, she had constantly reiterated the need for a new building. It was not to be during her tenure in office, as she decided to retire in 1963. She had been employed at the library for 36 years and chief librarian for almost 23 years, making her the longest-serving chief librarian in the history of the institution. The new chief librarian took office on August 1, 1963. Charles Brisbane, or Charlie B., had come to library work late in life, only going to library school at the age of 40. His previous employment had included postman, news reporter, oil field surveyor, as well as serving in the Royal Artillery during World War II. He worked 1 year with the North York Public Library Bookmobile Service before becoming Chief Librarian at Waterloo Public Library for 3 years before moving to the Chief Librarian's job at HPL. His arrival was a distinct shock to the rather staid world that Dr. Waldon had left behind. One of his first suggestions was that the library should be open 24/7. Obviously, that did not go over terribly well. He also started changing the physical appearance of the library, as the standard colors had always been gray and yellow. When Westdale Library was renovated in the mid-60s, the colors he picked were red and purple. Needless to say, the customers hated it. He also tried to break the long-held female domination of the profession by hiring male librarians. It caused great consternation, but eventually the library culture caught up to the times. On November 27, 1963, the new ultra-modern Barton Library was officially opened. In 1964, the library staff was unionized as a local of CUPE, and on May 21, 1965, they announced the ratification of their first contract. In 1966, for the first time, the possibility of opening the new library in the new Civic Square development being proposed was suggested. At this point, the library board was still committed to either adding an addition to the existing library or tearing it down and building a new library on the same site. On November 10, 1968, the library began opening on Sundays. Except for the brief experiment in 1913 to 1914, it is the first time in the history of the library that it was open regularly on Sundays. Also, in keeping with the times, the swinging 60s, the library announced the first annual Farrago Frolic, a psychedelic celebration of books and the arts. Since it was going to be too noisy for the actual library building, it was relocated to 39 James Street South, the old Imperial Bank building, now the site of the parking lot across from the Piggott building. And it would run daily from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., except Sundays, from November 6th until December 24th, 1968. The band shown here is the Mara Loves. The dress code at the library also started to change during these times. For the first time, female staff were allowed to wear pantsuits, and the Spectator headline read, "Library's image swinging as pantsuits deemed modest." There were only 3 or 4 protests over the new dress code, all from elderly women. The dress code already allowed miniskirts, and as one of the staff pointed out, the pants were much less daring. The Spectator also noted later that year from the Postscript's official Girl Watcher that there's good hunting in the main library these days. We congratulate the chief librarian upon his choice of highly decorative personnel. The decade of the 1970s started out with the official opening of the new Terryberry Library by Lieutenant Governor Ross MacDonald on April 5, 1970. Perhaps explaining why the City Council had been less than supportive of the library's search for a new building, a Spectator article noted that out of 21 elected council members, only 8 had library cards and only 4 used them. The chief librarian made the news in a different way in August of 1970, when his sailboat collided with the Hudson's Bay ketch Nonsuch in Hamilton Harbor. It was at the moment the Nonsuch tied up that Mr. Brisbane, waving friendly greetings to Mayor Copps and a number of officials, momentarily forgot to watch where he was going and sailed into the ketch. Mr. Brisbane, whose stern sail was either knocked down or hastily taken down as it was locked with the foresail of the Nonsuch, was unavailable for comment. On July 13, 1971, the Hamilton Public Library held its first annual book sale, with all books being for sale for 25 cents. In keeping with the Spectator's regular coverage, there was the necessity for a pretty girl in a short skirt to sit on top of boxes of books for the illustration. With the lack of space in the main library still a serious issue, the library proposed renting the Bank of Montreal premises at the southwest corner of Main and James as a temporary site for the reference collection. In January of 1973, the reference library closed for 5 days to move into the bank location and opened for business on January 23, 1973. In those 5 days, 11 employees, all women, moved 120,000 books and 27 tons of paper. The City of Hamilton finally committed itself to building a new main library for $4 million. However, the library board unanimously rejected the Jackson Square site in favor of rebuilding on the present site. Later that year, Frank Hogg, a library consultant from Wales, who was an expert on library relocations, was brought on board. Unfortunately, ex-chief librarian Frida Waldon never saw the reality of a new library, as she died in November of 1973. In October of 1974, the statue Il Bibliotecaro was presented to the library by the Italian community and was promptly put in storage as they had no place to display it. That same month, the Special Collections Department was formed to amalgamate the Canadiana, Rare Book, Hamilton, and manuscript collections. It was housed on the south mezzanine of the Bank of Montreal, as well as in 17 other locations across the city. The Library Board and Yale Properties reached an agreement in principle on a design plan to put the new library into the Civic Square, and in February of 1975, the Library Board officially approved the Library Market Complex on Merrick Street. The estimated cost was set at $8.1 million, which by June of the same year had jumped to $9.9 million. The man who almost single-handedly rammed through the new library, however, would not be around to shepherd it to completion. Charles Brisbane took a leave of absence starting September 23, 1977. In November 1977, the cost estimate was now $10.5 million. On January 25, 1978, the official sod turning for the new Central Library took place. The library closed for staff to attend, which prompted aldermen to complain that since they were not working, they should be docked 2.5 hours' pay. On May 1, 1978, the resignation of Charles Brisbane took effect, and on June 24, 1978, he launched a lawsuit against the Hamilton Public Library. The lawsuit was later settled out of court. On December 1, 1978, Frank Hogg was appointed the new chief librarian. He was the principal of the College of Librarianship in Wales. He continued on with the task of building New Central Library, as it became known, as costs continued to escalate. In August, a Spectator poll found 1 in 6 people found the new Central Library building ugly and offensive. The next month, the cost estimate was $15.8 million. After only 13 months, Frank Hogg resigned in February of 1980 to return to Wales for personal reasons. Judith McAnanima officially became the new chief librarian, or chief executive officer as she preferred to be called, on March 1, 1980. She had joined the library in 1965 as a children's librarian and later became branch head at both Westdale and Terryberry before becoming head of Central. She was only the second staff member in the history of the library to become the chief librarian. On May 31, 1980, the new Central Library was officially opened by His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, who commented, as there was nothing in it yet, "It's rather like opening an empty cupboard. Any of you who can't read have got from now until November to learn how to do it." In August and September of 1980, both the main library and the reference library closed for the move. In keeping with the Spectator's tradition, the move was illustrated by showing young women working at preparing the library to move. Just before opening the new building, the Spectator took a photograph of the entire staff outside the building. There are still a few of them here today that were in that shot. On October 15, 1980, the new Central Library opened for business. The official cost for the building was set at $12.5 million. Cost-cutting measures had included not having a spiral staircase from the 5th to the 6th floor and eliminating escalators past the 2nd floor. The first patron through the door was quoted by the Spectator as saying that it looked like a factory. The official name of the architectural style of the building was Neo-Brutalist. In February of 1981, the public area in the Special Collections Department was named the Waldon Room in honor of the former chief librarian. Later that year, after 7 years in storage, the bronze statue Il Bibliotecaro was unveiled in front of the library. While one onlooker enthused "Magnifico," another muttered "Yuck." In May of 1982, the Library Board passed the Open Access Policy, which effectively lifted restrictions on children's borrowing, letting them borrow any book in the system. The previous policy restricted adult fiction to students in grade 9 and up, with no restrictions on nonfiction. At the same time, the board also reaffirmed the policy of no fines for board members, staff, and politicians. The first automated checkout system was implemented at Central with the installation of Dobus Libus, where books were checked in and out using a wand and barcode. This is the first checkout desk where lineups disrupted the children's department. This is the second version of the checkout desk, where they moved the orientation 45 degrees. This is the informational directional desk on the first floor. In 1989, the library celebrated the centennial of their creation in 1889. There was a mascot, Centennial, usually played by Mary McKinley. This is the only picture of Mary not playing the owl. She's walking next to it. Somebody else is in the costume. You had to have somebody with Centennial at all times because the costume was such that you couldn't see where you were going. We had a costumed reenactment of the opening of the first library with staff members Robert Oldham and Sharon Treacher playing Lord and Lady Aberdeen. After the ceremony, there was cake. There was even a special Centennial logo that was used for the whole year. During that same year, the first tender was issued for the supply and maintenance of IBM or IBM-compatible microcomputer equipment, printers, and related devices. Judith McAnanama retired in 1994, and the new chief librarian was announced as Ken Roberts. He had grown up in Los Angeles, but had spent the years 1969 to 1973 working with McMaster University. He had degrees in history and library science, and was the chief librarian at the Whitby Library. He took over on November 1, 1994. Possibly the biggest challenge to face the library system in the next years was amalgamation. The province decided that the 3 existing library systems in the region would be amalgamated. The Hamilton Public Library would be amalgamated with the Wentworth County Library and the Dundas Public Library to become the new Hamilton Public Library. The larger of the other 2 systems was the Wentworth County Library. Originally, there were small libraries all over Wentworth County, usually in people's houses staffed by volunteers. The Wentworth County Cooperative Library was formed in 1948 and included Ancaster, Carlisle, Freelton, Greensville, Millgrove, Saltfleet, Stony Creek, Waterdown, and Winona. Rockton joined in 1955. In 1966, the Wentworth County Library System replaced the old cooperative. Binbrook, Glanford, Linden, and Mount Hope opened that same year. Sheffield opened in 1968, and Mount Albion, now Valley Park, joined in 1978. The other library system was the Dundas Public Library. The Dundas Mechanics Institute and Literary Association was founded October 3, 1841, and incorporated in 1857. The Dundas Mechanics Institute became the Dundas Public Library in 1883. Dundas Public Library moved into their new Carnegie building in 1910. On December 22, 1963, the Dundas Public Library chose not to join the new Wentworth County Library. Dundas Public Library moved into their new building in 1970. The new Hamilton Public Library came into effect on January 1, 2001. The Central Library went through a massive redesign, which saw our street presence vastly changed. Ken Roberts retired in 2012, and the new and current chief librarian is Paul Takala. He's only the 3rd staff member in the history of the library to be appointed chief librarian. To beat Frida's record in office, he'd have to stay chief librarian until 2035. Margaret Houghton is not the only staff member in Local History and Archives who can answer questions. The other staff is quite competent and knowledgeable about the department and local history. When you call, give them a chance. We do know where the bodies are buried.